you know, it's pretty common for people to do this and kind of look at and see what the neck looks like. It's a little deceiving to do that because of the change of angle that generally occurs here. It makes it often, if there's much relief, it makes it look like there's a hump here rather than that the neck is coming up and meeting the place where the neck slightly changes angle when it conforms to the surface of the soundboard. So a good way to do it, you can use a straight edge that you always have with you when you have your guitar, and that straight edge is a string. So if you take the string, and you guys do this with me, press it down at the 1st fret, and then with your pinky press it down between the 13th and the 14th fret. So that isolates the area of the neck that is subject to the pull of the strings and will actually bend with the strings. Then if you reach way over, you can push down on it and see how much space there is between the frets there, the 5th and 6th fret, and I'm looking particularly at the 5th right now, and the bottom of the string. And ideally, if a guitar has good frets that are in good alignment and they're not too worn, that gap can be as little as, I'm going to use a number here, 0.02 of an inch, or 1, 2, 3,000ths of an inch, something like that. On a guitar that the frets are out of alignment or that the frets are badly worn, in order to play and not have a buzzy, fuzzy sound, you might need to have 10, 15,000ths. Now that's the diameter of your 1st string, so you can think about that as a relationship to what 1 to 2,000ths is. And what the difference is there is that if your neck is bent over and allowing a 10 or 15,000ths relief at the 5th fret, that means when you're playing here, you're playing against a string that's suspended over a chasm. It's like, a suspension bridge. And so the string has to be pushed down a long way, especially in this midsection of the fingerboard. So it's a good idea to have your guitar in a condition where that neck can be as flat as possible without you having, when you play, say, an A note there, it doesn't buzz on the B or the C or any of the others, that you won't have it hitting the other frets. It has a nice clean sound. So that's the first step to determining what it takes to make a good setup on a guitar. So if I find that that's excessive or too tight, then the first thing I'll do is I'll adjust the truss rod. Many guitars have a plate here. Many guitars have an access point here to the truss rod. And the truss rod history a little bit, around 1920, somewhere in there, the Gibson company started putting truss rods in their instruments, and they were the first to have an adjustable reinforcing rod. A lot of guitar makers have reinforcing rods either made of a hardwood that was embedded in the neck under the fingerboard, or even a piece of steel. Some of these, I don't know if you've ever seen the old Kay and Harmony guitars where they, on the top of the peg head, it would say steel reinforced neck. That would tell you that probably the neck's not going to bend over years, but it doesn't give you any ability to adjust the neck, adjust the relief of the neck. So with an adjustable truss rod, the Martin company puts theirs right in here. You see a little hole there, and they developed a tool. On most American-made guitars, the truss rod will be adjusted, most guitars will be adjusted with Allen wrenches. Some guitars have a nut in there, and so I use nut drivers for those. But the Martin Guitar Company developed this, and on some of their guitars, they, on the newer ones, the access to the truss rod is way back in here, and you have to use a longer one, so then they developed this one. But generally speaking, I'll just push it in there and find that spot where it's in the Allen wrench is in the surface of the end of the truss rod. And generally just this tiniest little turn will make some difference. Now some truss rods will adjust quicker or with less motion than others. Some you might turn it like in this sense, I would turn it not even an eighth of a turn before I'd run up against pushing the string out of alignment, and then I'd come back and I'd grab another bite and I'd come over. And some guitars I found I'll have to take 2 or 3 of those maybe eighth turns to even get the truss rod to begin to respond to it. But for most of them, a small turn makes a difference. And so you want to make a small adjustment and then go back and check again using your 1st and your 13th fret, and just do that until you have it down to where it's just loose of the fret. If you find then after you start playing it that there's buzzing going on, then you might release a little bit of that and allow the neck to come a little bit forward, and find that kind of spot where you have the least amount of relief without buzzing.
So which way turning it makes it?
Generally speaking, it's always righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So you tighten it by going clockwise, and that will pull the neck back, and you release it. Now, a more or less recent development is what they call a dual action truss rod. Most of them will only tighten. In other words, they'll only pull the neck against the tension of the strings, and the string tension then will come back and cause the neck to give you some relief.
On a solid body like this, where the truss rod's up there, so if this guitar is pointed in your direction, and if the action goes up because the weather's dry, so would you go that way?
Well, to draw the neck back would be a clockwise turn of the truss rod in most cases. Now, the only exception to that I know is pretty common is on national guitars.
Yeah.
Nationals have a left turn that tightens it. So, it's a different way they put it in, I guess. But yeah, whether you're coming from this end or this end, clockwise will draw the neck back. That's the tension. And with a dual action truss rod, there'll be a neutral point between when you're drawing it back and when it releases. So you'll loosen, say you want to add more relief. And on some guitars, the neck is stiff enough that it won't go very far. If you really need to bring it forward, it won't go very far with the tension of the strings, just because the neck's fairly stiff. But with the dual action, it'll actually put pressure on the neck and push it forward. So if you need to do that, and I've seen very few guitars that actually needed that, but it is available, and a lot of makers have gone to dual action truss rods. So once you've got the truss rod in a good place initially, then I check the action of the top nut. And the top nut, like the truss rod, the closer you can get it without the string buzzing on the first fret, the easier it's going to be to use the strings at the first and the low position frets. So I use the 3rd fret, and you all might want to try this also. So I push the E string down at just in front of the 3rd fret, so that the string is suspended between the top nut here and the 3rd fret, and then check the gap at the 1st fret. And again, if a guitar is well set up, or frets are in good shape, you should be able to get away with just a clearance. That's all it takes, is just so that it's not touching. And generally, that'll give you plenty of room when you're playing your open notes. But the second thing that it does is it allows you to play in, say, your mid-range without getting funny harmonics going on back here, because the string is zinging across the top of the frets. And I've seen that happen, not a lot, but on several guitars. So that's the other part of having the nut too low. Even if the 1st fret doesn't buzz, oftentimes you'll get in a position, and one of them was really hard to find, and it actually had to have, I can't remember what chord it was, but we were playing, got it up at up in this range. Seems like it was right below the. But anyway, you had to play a certain chord for one of the strings to make this funny harmonic noise, because one of the other strings was causing the frequency to be just right for that to vibrate enough for the string to actually hit. So it doesn't happen all that often, but if you have just a little clearance there at the top, at the nut to the 1st fret, that will keep you from having that problem. So from there, I get out on the action here. What I look for generally is something like 5 to 5.5 64ths on the bass side, and 4.5 to 5 64ths on the treble side. And since the bridge saddle is assumed to be radiused to match the upper end of the fingerboard, you don't need to measure the center strings because they're dependent on how the bridge is set, or how the bridge saddle is set. But once I get that much of it done, those 3 steps, adjust the truss rod, check and or adjust the top nut, check and or adjust the action at the bridge, then it's time to play it and find out if there's any notes that are weak or dead or whatever. If there's any question about that, generally the next thing I do is I've got a straight edge here that I can take and check for any high frets. So I'll go across each set of 3 frets. There's a tiny bit, not enough to make a difference, but that's probably less than 1/1000th of an inch there. That one's a little missed it. That one's about the same. So I've got the fingerboard real flat on this. I'm not getting any buzzes. This is my guitar, so I've got it really flat. I'm not getting any buzzes. So those are insignificant. If it rocks like that one might, on a guitar that you played much above the neck to body joint, that one might make a difference, but so rare that you get up there on an acoustic. So that would be the next step, is to check and see if there's high frets and low frets. If there are, then it generally will, if the frets are still not worn out, then generally it'll be a candidate for a fret leveling. And the fret leveling job, what I'll do is, of course, take the strings off, I remove the top nut, and then I check with a straight edge that's as long as this area of the neck, and I'll check and make sure that that is as straight as it can be. Now generally, once you tighten the truss rod, and then you loosen the strings, the neck will back bow a little bit. So I'll readjust the truss rod to get the fingerboard as flat as I can get it, and then check again with my rocker here, and then I use a 14-inch bench plane, like a wood plane, steel, or a cast iron foot on it. So I use the sole of that. I've removed all the parts that actually shave wood. But I use the sole of that, and I put a piece of 600 grit wet or dry on that. And I'll just scrub the whole fingerboard with that. And I can tell by the little lines that appear in the top of the frets which one's high, because it'll be wider because of the radius to the top of the fret. And so I'll be able to see where all the higher ones are. And on some of them, I'll do that, and I won't even get down to the lower ones before I'll need to take some material off the sides of the higher ones, because now they're a big block of fret material, and it takes so long to take those down anymore that what I'll do is I didn't bring my crowning files, but I've got a set of files that on the edge of the file. The files are probably 3/32 of an inch wide, and on the edge of the file is the filing surface, and it is concaved to match the radius of the top of the fret. They're crowning files. So then I'll take my crowning files and I'll get all those frets that are showing up really wide down to a more reasonable width, and then I'll scrub it again. And I'll do that until I get it to where I've got contact with every fret. And then I'll go over and recrown each fret. And then once I get them all recrowned, I'll take the used sandpaper that I already kind of got worn out, and I'll lightly go over the whole thing and make sure I've got just a thin line on each fret. And I know then the whole thing is level, and when the strings are off and the fingerboard's flat, every fret is going to be at the same height. And once I got to that point, then I use that same piece of 600 grit, and I'll wrap it around my crowning file, and I'll go over each one to remove the file marks and the sandpaper marks. So I'll go crosswise, and once I get that done, I use a process material that's called it's a polishing cloth kind of thing. It's called it's a graded, it looks like wet or dry sandpaper, but it's a graded abrasive, and the coarsest grade is about equal to 400 grit sandpaper, and the finest grade is like the the abrasive particles are like 0.2 microns. So the material was developed for polishing like windshields on fighter jets kind of thing, you know, to take every scratch out so the sun doesn't, you know, make a gleam on there. So you could use that on the fingerboard and get all the frets really nice and smooth on the edges and polish it all up and then restring it. And generally that solves any of those buzzing problems. And even most new guitars don't have frets that are that level. You know, they're pretty good. But and there's a new system that most of the builders or most of the big companies are using it called Plec system, which is an automated machine that does what I do. But I think mine's better. So that's the basics of the setup. You can run into a situation where the bridge saddle is too high, or the action's too high, but the bridge saddle has already been lowered down to the top of the bridge. And then there's no place to adjust there. And so a guitar like that, generally we start looking at the neck angle to the body. And if it's a quality guitar that warrants restoration, the job is called a neck reset. You probably have heard that term used. And in a neck reset, I take all the measurements of it and have a target for how much bridge saddle I want to have protruding above the top of the bridge before I take it apart. And also I take a straight edge and I measure down to the front of the bridge to get the fret line to where it hits the bridge and how far up from the soundboard that is. And then when I release the neck by taking the strings off, then I measure that again, and generally that will have come back some, the whole thing. And that is due to that the body is flexing when you put it under tension. The sides bend a little bit, and that's primarily where the flex comes from. But the neck block, which is a pretty good sized piece of block wood in here, is turning pretty hard on this, and so the body flexes some, and so I take that into consideration that there's going to be, say, a 32nd of an inch difference when I get the neck at a new angle. So when I tune it up, it's going to pull that amount again. So I factor that in. But the process of doing a neck reset involves I make a heat shield for the guitar that exposes the extension of the fingerboard. And then I put a heat lamp over it and get it hot enough to soften the glue that connects the fingerboard to the soundboard. And then I work a little pastry knife in there until it's loose. And then I pull the 15th fret and I make a hole that's 3/32 of an inch through the top of the guitar, and it just so happens that that is where the joint to the neck has a gap in between the wood that comes out of the back of the neck, protrudes into the neck block, and the neck block itself. So that, compound dovetail joint. And dovetail joint you've probably seen on the corners of a drawer or something like that, where you have these interlocking pieces of wood that kind of fit together, and each one is wider at the corner than it is back in the wood, so that the pieces are locked together by the size of the wood. And so the neck in the guitar has a similar shape to it. It's kind of a trapezoidal shape where the piece that goes from the neck heel into the neck block is shaped with its corners at an angle like that and a flat side here, and then obviously it's smaller at the bottom. So as you push the neck into the neck block, it gets tighter and tighter as it goes down because the space is narrower at the bottom. Unlike your drawer, it's a straight angle that goes through the wood, so you could conceivably push the piece of side straight through the piece of front. And so that's the difference here, is that it's a locking joint so that as you push it in, it gets tighter. So after I've drilled that hole under where the fret used to be, I insert a needle that looks kind of like a needle you fill a football with, and it's hooked up to generate steam with a pressure cooker, and I steam the neck until the glue gets soft, and I have a fixture that pushes it apart while I'm doing that. So then I have the neck loose, I clean out all the glue from in there, and then start with my reshaping. So in order to correct the problem, and generally the problem is not in the neck itself that causes this piece of bone that we call the bridge saddle to have to be adjusted down more and more. It's more about that flexion of the body, because as the guitar gets older, the body flexes a little more and a little more, and that's one of the reasons why older guitars gain so much more tone, because they get more flexible, they vibrate easier, they're very responsive to the touch of the pick or the fingers on the strings. So it's not a bad thing to have an older guitar, but it's kind of like having an older car or something like that. It takes more maintenance and upkeep, but it gives you the pleasure of having it. So once the neck is out, then I have to shave off a thin strip from each side of the back of the neck heel. So the neck heel is shaped, it goes in and up from this edge here, and then it meets the inside edge of the dovetail. So the dovetail, if you were looking at it from back here, is shaped like so. It's just small, and that area from here to the edge of the dovetail is the part that has to be shaved, as well as the little piece that goes across here. So if there's very much that needs to be taken off, sometimes I'll use a chisel and just chisel off the bulk of it. But you don't want to take anything off here, right? You just have to take it off here just to create more angle, back angle to the neck. So the finishing up of that is done with strips of sandpaper, usually about 1/2 inch wide or so, and backed by a material that'll make them strong enough. And so I'll slip the neck. Once I've done that removal of the bulk of it, the neck fits pretty loosely. I'll slip the neck into the joint, hold it down with some force with my finger and my hand, and with the sandpaper in their face, rough side up, I'll pull it out. And what that does is it takes next nothing off here, but the whole piece of sandpaper rubs back here. So it's graduated, and it shapes the side of the edge of the neck directly to the shape of the guitar. So a lot of guitars, they look very straight, but there's either, there's something about them it's not necessarily a flat surface. It's wood after all, and it can change. But that's the way that the neck angle is then adjusted. And I've got my process worked out now to where I can make a saddle in advance as high as I want it to be, and I'll shape the neck to match. In the factories, they'll shape the neck to approximately where they want it, and then they'll make a saddle the height that it's required to make the neck work. But I do it the opposite way, because I know that don't want to overstress the top, but I want to have enough leverage with the bridge to really get the body to be, have its pressure on it that helps bring the sound out. So that's a limitation to the adjustments that you can make on a guitar when the bridge saddle is all the way down where there's no more room to adjust it, and the action's still high, and everything else is an adjustment. Then we're looking at generally a neck reset in order to make it so that it can be adjusted and be comfortable again. Most guitars, the ones that I've done or even seen that have been done, only need that process once in their lifetime. Barring some incident like, one of the biggest issues that can damage a guitar is allowing it to get too hot. So heat will soften the glue. It will also make the wood more flexible. So I'm sure you all are aware that you don't want to leave your guitar in the car on a sunny day, because the car will get hot enough to melt the glue, and the tension of the strings will start to do some bad things to it. So that's if that happens and a guitar has already had its, its 100,000-mile rebuild of its engine, then it might need some more work if it's possible to do it. But sometimes they get worked to the point where, no amount of trying to redo it is going to make it back to where it was. So that's the basics, most guitars within, I'd say 3 to 10 years after they're made need new frets. And that's another process that when I do a neck reset, or when I do a full refret, which is basically all I do if I need to work with frets, I'll do them all. And the reason for that is that in order to replace, say, the first 7 to 10 frets, which always show the more wear than others, you have to take those frets out, you have to put new frets in, and then those new frets are not going to be at the same height of the old frets, so you have to then remove material off the new frets, so you're kind of initially wearing out your frets as soon as you get going. And the cost of just pulling out and replacing those first 7 to 10 frets is probably going to be $100 or $150, and then the cost of a fret leveling that I explained to you is $125. I can refret an instrument for $225 because you combine those two things and there's no real leveling to do, and that's dependent on the person who does the refretting, making absolutely sure that the fingerboard, after you get the frets out, that the fingerboard is absolutely true. So I found that even really good guitars, sometimes when they're made, the fingerboards are close but not right on. So when I have the frets out, I'll use that same cast iron sole to the plane and line it with a heavier grade of abrasive, and then I'll make sure that as I go up and down that I'm getting good contact throughout. And sometimes you'll have little fingernail divots and whatnot, and some of those will be taken out while that planing is being done. Sometimes the neck is higher or lower in certain places, so I just correct all those things so that when I put the new frets in, that I know that they're going to be in alignment, and it takes all that final work out of it to do the preparation while you're doing it. So that's the basics of setup, and a little bit deeper there as far as truss rod adjustments. And
Question?